Hey! So, in honor of Black History Month, and I know it's a shame we get the shortest month of the year, but we still make it do what it do, so it's all good. But in honor of Black History Month and me being an aspiring writer, I thought I'd take some time to present to you a few of my favorite Black writers and some of the literature that I've grown to love and cherish as a person who loves to read. Okay, enough rambling, let's go. First, we have Nella Larsen
And just
passing.
to provide a little bit of background context of Nella Larsen's life, to give credit to the writer of the post, it does say contributed by Doris Richardson Johnson. Nella Larsen, nurse, librarian, and writer, was born Nella Marie Larsen in Chicago in 1891 to a Danish mother and a Black West Indian father. Knowing little about her father after his death when she was 2 years old, she was reared in the home with her mother, remarried to a Danish man, and her half-sister. Larsen attended school in all-white environments in Chicago until 1906 to 1907, when she moved to Nashville, Tennessee, to attend high school at Fisk University's normal school. This was her introduction to a predominantly Black environment. After completing the year at Fisk, Larsen journeyed to Denmark, where she spent 3 years, 1909 to 1912, with relatives and audited courses from the University of Copenhagen. Returning to the United States, she entered a 3-year course of study at Lincoln Hospital Training School for Nurses in New York City. Larsen later practiced nursing from 1915 to 1921 at John A. Andrew Hospital and Nurse Training School in Alabama and the City Department of Health in New York. On May 3, 1919, Larsen married Dr. Elmer Samuel Imaz, a Black physicist who became the chairman of the physics department at Fisk University. So as we can see, Nella Larsen has a very diverse background in terms of the places she's lived and the careers that she's pursued. From 1922 to 1926, Larsen served as a librarian at the New York Public Library. After resigning from this position, she began her literary career by writing her first novel, Quicksand, in 1928. Meshing autobiography and fiction in order to explore the psychology of racial dualism and marginality on Black middle-class women, Quicksand won Larsen the Harmon Foundation's Bronze Medal, second prize, and secured her a position as an important literary figure of the Harlem Renaissance. In her second novel, Passing, in 1929, Larsen suggests with the contrastive lives of two women that passing is as much a psychological state of mind as it is physical. After the publication of this novel, in 1930, Larsen was awarded the first Guggenheim Fellowship to an African American woman. Working on her third book in Spain, Larsen was distracted by a charge of plagiarism of her short story Sanctuary in 1930 and an accidental discovery of her husband's infidelity. Although she was cleared of the plagiarism charge, her marriage did not survive. She was divorced in Nashville, Tennessee in 1933. Added to these complications in her life, the stock market crash of 1929 reduced the financial assistance available to support Black artists. Larsen never completed her third novel. That's a shame, and because I'm sure it would have been dope and I would have loved to read it. After her former husband's death in 1941, the alimony paycheck ceased and Larsen returned to her nursing career, working at Bethel Hospital in Brooklyn until she died in 1964. So that's Larsen's biography according to blackpast.org. It gives us insight into who Nella Larsen is and her journey into becoming a writer or an author, and some details of her past that contributed to the genre.
And I did a really extensive paper on this book in my undergrad. In fact, I'm gonna go see if I can read you an excerpt from my literary analysis paper that I wrote on Nella Larsen's Passing. And Passing is about a woman in the 1920s, sort of like that Harlem Renaissance era. Nella Larsen depicts the story of a young woman who is Black but very light enough to pass as a white woman. And so she basically leaves her family and she integrates herself in a white society. She marries a white man. There's no sort of like speculation that she is in fact a black woman. Oh, and I'm going to read an excerpt from the text to get you guys, to pique you guys' interest and maybe encourage you or motivate you to try the text out for yourself. It's a good read. A lot of students who major in African American literature or studies or English lit in general may have come across this text. Oh, we gonna get it together, we gonna get it together, we gonna get it together. Again, she's very much embedded in white society, upper middle class society, and her husband and her children and her community has no idea of her racial background. However, has this strong longing, this very deep desire to reconnect with her roots. And so Irene begins to travel to Harlem. She ends up going into these places where kind of like the black elite congregate and, you know, celebrate each other and enjoy music together and, you know, have these social gatherings. She begins to participate in those environments, socializing amongst the black elite in these intimate spaces. And it's funny because there's this really dramatic ending to the story. Irene's husband ends up showing up to one of these events and things do not go in a positive direction. I'm going to read a little bit of an excerpt, and if I find my paper, I'm going to read that too. So passing chapter 1, I'm going to read maybe a few paragraphs and see, and you guys decide how much you like it and whether you think you want to give it a chance and whether you think you want to pick it up and try it out. Okay. It was the last letter in Irene Redfield's little pile of morning mail. After her other ordinary and clearly directed letters, the long envelope of thin Italian paper with its almost illegible scrawl seemed out of place and alien. And there was, too, something mysterious and slightly furtive about it, a thin, sly thing which bore no return address to betray the sender. Not that she hadn't immediately known who its sender was. Some 2 years ago, she had one very like it, in outward appearance, furtive, but yet in some peculiar, determined way, a little flaunting, purple ink, foreign paper of extraordinary size. So there's already this sense of mystique and suspense around this letter that Irene is about to read, right? That she received in the mail. It had been, Irene noted, postmarked in New York the day before. Her brows came together in a tiny frown. The frown, however, was more from perplexity than from annoyance, though there was in her thoughts an element of both. The writing is so beautiful. The language, the vocabulary, the vibe of it all, I love it. Those who get it, get it. The literature majors definitely get it. She was wholly unable to comprehend such an attitude towards danger, as she was sure the letter's contents would reveal, and she disliked the idea of opening and reading it. Ooh, so things are kind of like heating up. There's some tension building here. This, she reflected, was a piece with all that she knew of Claire Kendry, stepping always on the edge of danger, always aware but not drawing back or turning aside, certainly not because of any alarms or feeling of outrage on the part of others. And for a swift moment, Irene Redfield seemed to see a pale, small girl sitting on a ragged blue sofa, sewing pieces of bright red cloth together, while her drunken father, a tall, powerfully built man, raged threateningly up and down the shabby room, bellowing curses and making spasmodic lunges at her, which were not the less frightening because they were, for the most part, ineffectual. Sometimes he did manage to reach her, but only the fact that the child had edged herself and her poor sewing over to the farthermost corner of the sofa suggested that she was in any way perturbed by this menace to herself and her work. So Irene is thinking about this letter, and then, you know, she has this memory. She knows that the letter is from this character, Claire Kendry, and then she has this memory of, you know, the way that Claire used to be as a little girl, right? Obviously, Claire comes from a very dysfunctional household. Her father was a drunk. Her father was extremely abusive. And Irene is recollecting these images of more than likely her childhood friend. Claire had known well enough that it was unsafe to take a portion of the dollar that was her weekly wage for the doing of many errands for the dressmaker who lived on the top floor of the building, of which Bob Kendry was janitor. But that knowledge had not deterred her. She wanted to go to her Sunday school's picnic, and she had made up her mind to wear a new dress. So, in spite of certain unpleasantness and possible danger, she had taken the money to buy the material for that pathetic little red frock. There had been, even in those days, nothing sacrificial in Claire Kendry's ideal of life. No allegiance beyond her own immediate desire. She was selfish and cold and hard. I've kind of been described that way once or twice in my life, so this is kind of like, ooh, this is a little bit stunning for me. And yet she had, too, a strange capacity of transforming warmth and passion, verging sometimes almost on theatrical heroics. That's me again. I can be very dramatic. I can be the type of person who overreacts. People who know me, who are really close with me, know that I'm a water sign at the end of the day. I'm very emotional. I hold on to things. So, I'm sensitive. Hey, what do you want? Irene, who was a year or more older than Claire, remembered the day that Bob Kendry had been brought home dead, killed in a silly saloon fight. Claire, who was at the time a scant 15 years old, had just stood there with her lips pressed together, her thin arms folded across her narrow chest, staring down at the familiar pasty white face of her parent with a sort of disdain in her slanting black eyes. So wait, they brought her dead father back to her house? I mean, this was the 1920s, but that's kind of weird, no? For a very long time, she had stood like that, silent and staring. Then, quite suddenly, she had given way to a torrent of weeping, swaying her thin body, tearing at her bright hair, and stamping her small feet. The outburst had ceased as suddenly as it had all begun. She glanced quickly about the bare room, taking everyone in, even the two policemen. Okay, so the policemen brought his body back to the house. In a sharp look of flashing scorn. And in the next instant, she had turned and vanished through the door. Seen across the long stretch of years, the thing had more the appearance of an outpouring of pent-up fury than of an overflow of grief for her dead father, though she had been, Irene admitted, fond enough of him in her own rather cat-like way. Cat-like, certainly that was the word which best described Claire Kendry, if any single word could describe her. Characterization on deck. Now, I like the cat-like reference because we're already getting an account of Claire as this mysterious individual, which of course heavily ties or heavily plays into the development of her path, right? The development of her life path into this passing identity, right? In general, to describe her as cat-like already sort of tells us that this is a person who may have a lot of sneaky attributes about them or self-absorbed traits that she's unapologetic about, and those characteristics definitely play well into the type of person who would be willing to pass. Not to mention the fact that she was embedded in Black society as a child, living with her dad, who was a drunk and who was very violent, and we could only imagine that as an adult she wants to wash away that history, right? So passing definitely seems like something she would gravitate to without second thought. So cat-like, certainly that was the word which best described Claire Kendry, if any single word could describe her. Sometimes she was hard and apparently without feeling at all. Sometimes she was affectionate and rashly impulsive. That's me. She has to be a water sign, and my sign in particular. And there was about her an amazing soft malice, hidden well away until provoked. Then she was capable of scratching, and very effectively too. She has to be a Scorpio. No, there's no way that she's not. There's no way. Or driven to anger, she would fight with a ferocity and impetuousness that disregarded or forgot any danger, superior strength, numbers, or other unfavorable circumstances. How savagely she had clawed those boys the day they had hooted her parent and sung a derisive rhyme of her own composing, which pointed out certain eccentricities in his careening gait. Irene brought her thoughts back to the present, to the letter from Claire Kendry that she still had unopened in her hand. With a little feeling of apprehension, she very slowly cut the envelope, drew out the folded sheets, spread them, and began to read. It was, she saw at once, what she had expected since learning from the postmark that Claire was in the city, an extravagantly phrased wish to see her again. Well, she needn't and wouldn't, Irene told herself, accede to that. Nor would she assist Claire to realize her foolish desire to return for a moment to that life which long ago and of her own choice she had left behind her. So I'm going to stop there because I'm excited and I kind of want to read the book again. I might actually pick this up and read it again. So again, Passing is about this young African-American girl who is light or fair enough to integrate with, the white community. She takes advantage of her ability to do so. And as a result, she marries a white man. She has children who are technically white, right? Because even though, she has her black roots, those features would not be that pronounced considering that she looks almost white, her husband is a white man, and then she has these children. So now Irene, who herself is a part of the black community, Irene has this recollection of her friend Claire Kendry, and we're going to see the story unfold. I mean, we can definitely assume that Irene and Claire Kendry are going to reconnect in some way. Irene is going to be a part of Claire's journey in terms of Claire trying to reconnect with the black side. Again, she does have that longing to be a part of that community again because she misses it so much. Nella Larsen, Passing. Hope you enjoyed the little excerpt. Passing is an amazing book, very ahead of its time. There are actually a few hints of LGBTQ experiences taking place among certain characters, which I think is pretty phenomenal. But then, of course, it makes sense because it's the Harlem Renaissance, a setting, like I mentioned earlier, and of course, with such a culturally dynamic period of time in history, you would, Harlem Renaissance, you think of writers, you think of artists, you think of, just black people blossoming in various areas, various talents. You have the black bourgeoisie class coming into play, the black upper middle class presence again in Harlem, and you would naturally expect to see different lifestyles integrated into that environment. So it's not a surprise that Larsen includes those particular instances in her text. So go out and grab Passing. It's an amazing book. It's a small book, very thin, so it's not a long read. It's not a long read, but it's a very engaging read, and it's a page turner. And like I said, the style of Larsen's writing, the language, right, very beautiful storytelling. So this is book one, and stay tuned for more books. Again, we're going to take the next week in honor of Black History Month to celebrate prominent African American writers and writers of Black descent. All right, peace. That's what I have here, guys. And I didn't think I would find it, and I found it. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit of it. Listen, I don't remember anything. I don't remember what it sounds like. This might be, no, this is in my master's program. So you guys are going to read this with me. Oh my God, after almost 8 years of having written it. Nella Larsen's Passing appears written with notions surrounding same-sex desirability or homoerotic references that produce an underlying theme to that of race and racial identity. But it sounds good. The text serves as an illustration of the unstable and nuanced manner in which race and its overall construction perform in the African American community. We are given two female protagonists that in several ways dismantle the preconceived notions of Blackness, and they corrode the sentiments promoting rigid barriers of Blackness and whiteness, revealing that race is not a static artifact to be categorized in a particular compartment. Likewise, we are given an interesting depiction of sexuality through Irene Redfield and Claire Kendry that further disrupts the solid convention of heterogeneity, thus revealing the particularities involved in the social dynamics of 1920s Black society. Together, the themes of race and sexuality collaborate to form an interesting account of the passing experiences of Claire and Irene, who are ultimately performing and who represent those Blacks who are able to and who have historically boldly defied the boundaries of constructs, including race and sex. Lori Harrison Kahn addresses this interactive and interrelated concept in her article entitled Her Nig, Returning the Gaze of Nella Larsen's Passing. In this program, we had to read a book every week. When we submitted our weekly responses, we just had to sort of construct a thesis about that particular text, right, and arguing in favor of the thesis. All right, Harrison Kahn presents a thorough evaluation of the fluid and intersecting manner in which race and sexuality both function in the text. More importantly, however, her depiction of how the subject to race eclipses the brewing sexual desires that Irene possesses for Claire. It was sort of like proclaiming that the text is less about racial passing than it was about these women perhaps exploring their sexual curiosities. She states, in the opening chapter and in the first few pages of the second chapter, racial passing is displaced by what appears to be an implicit narrative of same-sex desire. If we were to begin reading the text without context, we would be initially in the dark about the presence and importance of race in the narrative. Indeed, it is certainly the case that this portion of the text is speculative at best, and if we were to approach the reading without an idea of what passing actually entails and represents, these pages would absolutely connote a picture of two women that may potentially be more than friends. The letter that Irene begins to read in the first chapter is very emotional in tone, and its words appear urgent and pressing as Claire writes, "For I am lonely, so lonely, cannot help longing to be with you again, as I have never longed for anything before." Claire's intent in this letter is strong, intimate, and desperate. She continues to describe the terrible, wild desire that Irene has invoked in her since their encounter in Chicago. Such moments are no doubt what Harrison Kahn alludes to in her discussion of the speculative nature of these early sections of the novel, leaving us to consider that Larsen deliberately withheld certain contextual clues in order to evade the reader. Passing obviously is situated in the subject of racial identity, but it would be a clever, in terms of literary strategy, that Larsen would devise such a thematic ambiguity within her text in order to visit identity issues as equally present. Of the back and forth movement of the characters between whiteness and blackness, I somewhat agree less, however. For Irene, it certainly is true, for it is apparent that she floats in and out of these identities at leisure and at convenience. Oh yeah, now because I haven't read the book in a long time. Now I remember that Irene did take advantage. Like Irene went on to situate herself in black spaces. She didn't pass, but she still was able to enjoy the privileges of passing, and she took advantage of those privileges whenever she felt the need to, which I think is really dope. I think it's super dope to think of, like, there are Black people in this country or in the world who they have integrated themselves within their Black communities or communal spaces, and maybe these people marry a Black person or a Black identified person, but then as they navigate the world, they can easily leave the Black side of town, right, and go into those other spaces and sort of like adopt those identities without raising any suspicions. Her racial ambiguity allows her to perform in such a manner, and she utilizes her ability to blend into white society to her advantage, as noted in her very decision to be taken to the Drayton, which by her later concerns of having been discovered, we can tell is a white-only establishment. I believe, however, that Claire is for the most part situated in her white identity. Although her desires to reconnect with her Blackness are triggered through Irene, we must not forget that for the most part of the text, she never quite re-enters this sphere, and her Black identity really remains confined. She attends most of the Negro parties not as a Black woman. In fact, her very decision to accompany the family to the parties is premised on her ability to further conceal her identity through the simple notion that the presence of whites at these events were rather customary, especially during the Harlem Renaissance. Claire is so conscious and confident in her ability to pass among the Negroes and whites that she exclaims to Irene that in the mixed crowds of these parties, she wouldn't be found out. Claire adheres to whiteness, and one may argue that she even begins to develop a fetish for Blackness with her evolving desire to be among them, as she exclaims to Irene, "It sounds terribly interesting and amusing," after learning from Irene that so many whites frequent these Harlem scenes. The title of the article is her neg, Returning the Gaze of Nella Larsen's Passing, by Laurie Harrison Kahn, Journal Modern Language Studies. So that gives you an account of the novel, and again, its little details surrounding notions or the same-sex subject matter. Again, we're talking about the Harlem Renaissance. So when we think about artists and we think about writers and we think about musicians and we think about all of these alluring and this thriving environment of intellectuals and creators, there's bound to be a presence of all types of individuals, like diverse individuals representing diverse backgrounds and diverse lifestyles. You guys should pick it up. If you've read it already, you can shout it out in the comments. Tell us your favorite part of the story. Tell us what you liked about the story. Thinking about African American History Month and, you know, the celebration of Black authors or Black writers. So go grab Nella Larsen's Passing. I am not in any way, shape, or form involved with, this is not like a sponsored anything. I just am a fan and I encourage everyone to read it.